The salty wind howls through the rigging as massive ships carve their way through endless, unpredictable oceans. Crew members battle towering waves, their knuckles white on weathered ropes, risking everything for a glimpse of new horizons. Each day aboard these vessels was a test of human resilience against storms, sickness, and the unforgiving sea. From shipbuilders risking life and limb in the shipyards to sailors navigating by fragile instruments, countless lives hung on skill, luck, and sheer courage. Behind every voyage lies stories of sacrifice, suffering, and heroic endurance that shaped the world as we know it. These sailors faced death with unwavering resolve, knowing that their survival was fragile as the hull beneath their feet. If you're fascinated by the human stories behind these daring explorations, hit subscribe and help us reach 3,000 followers. Let us know where you're watching from and drop a shipwreck if you're ready to set sail into history. You ever imagine how it was to be on a ship in the age of exploration? The cold, salty air biting into your skin, the creak of the wooden hull beneath your feet, the endless ocean stretching out mysterious and unforgiving. It's a world of danger, survival, and human resilience. Today, we're diving into that world to uncover the 6 most deadly professions aboard colonial ships. Those roles that could mean the difference between life and death in the open sea. Picture yourself on a large galleon or a slender caravel. The ship is a hive of activity, but danger lurks at every turn. From the construction of these ships to the daily grind of life on board, each job carried its own deadly risks. The human stories behind these roles are intense, full of suffering, courage, and sometimes tragic loss. Let's start with the builders. Colonial ships were primarily made of oak and pine, imported from forests that seemed to stretch forever. Carpenters and shipwrights worked tirelessly in shipyards, shaping massive planks into a hull that could withstand storms and battles. But building a ship was no gentle craft. 2,000 trees might be used for a single vessel. With axes, saws, and adzes, they carved the timber, often in harsh weather. Every cut could send splinters flying, and accidents were common. A slip of the axe could mean a severed finger or a fatal blow. Plus, working in damp, poorly ventilated yards, many fell ill or succumbed to infection. Once the ship was afloat, it became a floating city, full of life, but teetering on the edge of catastrophe. The crew hierarchy was strict, the captain at the top, then the master, officers, and sailors. Life on board was grueling, especially for sailors assigned to navigation, which was far from precise at the time. They relied on rudimentary instruments, like the compass and astrolabe, to find their way across endless blue. Imagine the horror when storms struck. Winds howled, waves crashed over the deck, and the ship groaned under the weight of the sea's fury. In such chaos, crew members could be washed overboard or crushed by falling masts. Survival at sea was a constant challenge. The cold was relentless. Sometimes icy waters seeped into the hull or froze on the rigging. During long voyages, scurvy was a killer. Caused by vitamin C deficiency, many sailors lost limbs or died slowly from bleeding gums and weakness. Rations could run out, leaving crews to subsist on moldy biscuits and salty water. Diseases spread fast in the cramped, damp quarters. Dysentery and typhus claimed lives silently and swiftly. Navigation itself was a hazardous craft. Without modern GPS, sailors depended on the stars, the sun, and simple tools that could be easily misread. A wrong reading could lead to shipwreck on hidden reefs, or even months lost at sea. When storms hit, navigation was a gamble. One miscalculation and ships could be thrown onto jagged rocks, sinking in seconds. The Atlantic and Pacific routes were riddled with such dangers, claiming about 20% of ships at certain times. And then there was the human toll. The psychological stress, unimaginable. Think about living in a tiny, swaying box with death around every corner. Men lost friends in storms or from illness. The constant noise, the creaking hull, the shouting sailors, the pounding waves, became a background hum of anxiety. Sleep was broken, and hope often flickered faintly. Now, among all these dangers, some roles were more deadly than others. For example, the ship's cook, who faced the risk of burns, cuts, and food poisoning. The ship's carpenters and riggers, who worked at dizzying heights, risking falls. The navigators, peering into the dark night, risking miscalculation and wreck. Each of these professions had a death rate that could make your head spin. So as we explore these 6 professions, remember, behind every voyage of discovery was a human story. People risking everything, enduring unimaginable suffering, all to expand the boundaries of the known world. The physical dangers were brutal, but so were the mental and emotional tolls. The bravery and resilience of these sailors and workers are what made the age of exploration possible. If you like stories of adventure, human endurance, and history, you already know this is a story of incredible sacrifice. So buckle up, because exploring these deadly professions brings us closer to understanding what life really was like aboard those ships that changed the world forever. Can you imagine what it's like to be crammed onto a wooden vessel miles from land in the dead of night? The air is thick with salt, dampness, and a bitter chill that cuts through your bones. Your hands are raw from tending the ropes, your stomach lurches from the endless rocking, and the noise is deafening. Waves crashing, wood creaking, sailors shouting commands. Imagine the smell of mold, rotting fish, and burnt pitch filling your nostrils. That's life aboard a colonial-era ship. Today, we're going to dive into those terrifying yet fascinating human experiences during the age of exploration, revealing what it really meant to survive on the high seas back in the 15th to 18th centuries. And if you love this kind of history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more storytelling that brings these stories to life. Let's start by setting the scene. The Age of Discovery was an era of relentless adventure. Ships like caravels and galleons crisscrossed uncharted waters, driven by a mix of curiosity, greed, and survival. But behind every successful voyage was a brutal reality. Many sailors faced every single day. Imagine yourself as part of a crew, packed onto a vessel that often measured less than 100 feet in length, carrying up to 150 men. No modern comforts here, no air conditioning, no medicine, not even decent sanitation. Just wood, canvas, and the relentless sea. The first thing to understand is just how dangerous these voyages were. Mortality rates soared. Estimates say about 20% of sailors didn't make it home. Why? Well, it wasn't just storms or pirates. That's cruel but real. The real killers were disease, malnutrition, and the brutal conditions. Diseases like scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, would wipe out entire crews. Imagine gums bleeding, teeth falling out, your body weakened and aching, all because fresh fruit was a rare luxury. And when scurvy took hold, it was a slow, painful death. But it wasn't only sickness that claimed lives. The sea itself was a relentless enemy. Storms could appear out of nowhere, violent, deafening, with wind howling like a banshee. The ship would shudder, wood groaning under the strain. Sometimes the waves were so tall they seemed to swallow the boat whole, cold water crashing over the deck. Men fought to keep the sails from tearing or the rigging from snapping. Many ships capsized or got stranded on rocks, lost forever in the abyss. And what about the crew's daily struggles? Imagine the constant fight against the cold, the salt, and the rot. The decks were icy in the morning, slick with frost. During the day, the sun baked the wood until it cracked and splintered. The sailors' hands were shredded from pulling ropes, their skin cracked and bleeding. The ship's smell, a potent cocktail of sweat, salt, and mold. And that's when everything was going smoothly. When trouble struck, it became a nightmare. Picture the human toll. Men with trembling hands, their gums bleeding from scurvy, their teeth falling out as they struggled to eat hard biscuits. the infamous ship's biscuit, as hard as concrete, filled with weevils and mold. Imagine vomiting over the side repeatedly, seasick and exhausted, while the cold wind cuts through your thin shirt. Some sailors froze to death during cold nights, unable to move, their bodies stiff and numb. Others suffered from dehydration because fresh water was scarce, replaced by salty brine or contaminated supplies. But it gets worse. There were times when the crew faced starvation, especially during long, stormy stretches with no land in sight. Imagine refusing to eat the rats and seagulls scavenging the ship's corners because they might carry disease. So the crew's diet was mostly salt beef, hardtack, and dried beans, food that was often infested or rotten. Cannibalism, rare but not unheard of in desperate moments. It was a true test of human endurance, mental, physical, emotional. And still, there was another layer to this suffering. The psychological toll. Imagine the loneliness, the constant fear, the claustrophobic feeling of being trapped at sea. Men went mad from the monotony and terror. Some would stare at the endless horizon praying for land, while others became numb or aggressive. The crew's mental health was fragile. A clash could erupt at any moment. And with no access to proper medicine, minor injuries could become infections, leading to gangrene or death. Now, how did they cope? Survival techniques varied. Some sailors kept journals, recording their ordeal, tiny acts of rebellion, humor, or hope. Others relied on superstition, prayers, charms, or curses. Many formed tight bonds, sharing rations and stories, trying to drown out the fear. And the ship's captain, he was both leader and a figure of authority, but also a source of dread. His orders could mean the difference between life and death, sometimes deciding whether to press on through the storm or to turn back. Let's not forget the ship's construction. The vessels of the era were marvels of craftsmanship. Made from hundreds, sometimes thousands of trees, up to 2,000 in a large galleon, they were built to endure, but not invincible. Every plank had to be carefully fitted, every sail perfectly sewn. Yet with each storm, the wood would crack, the nails loosen, leaks would form. Constant maintenance was a nightmare, impossible to avoid. And when a ship took a hit, the crew had to act fast to patch the hole, often while battling the storm. Imagine the noise, the creaking of the hull, the slap of water against the sides, the shouts of the sailors trying to stabilize the ship. The smell of tar and wood smoke filled the air. The deck was a chaotic scene. Men bailing water, patching sails, tying down cargo, all under the threat of capsizing or being washed overboard. It was a terrifying dance with death, repeated day after day, week after week. Even with all these dangers, why did they do it? Well, the motivations varied. Wealth, adventure, empire building. But human endurance was the true test. These sailors, many of whom had little choice, endured unimaginable hardships. Their stories are stories of resilience, the grit to survive a brutal voyage, knowing that land, riches, or even death could be just beyond the horizon. So next time you look at a modern cruise ship or a cargo vessel, think about those old sailors, those brave souls who faced the cold, hunger, disease, and despair. Their sacrifices laid the foundation for the world we know today. And if you want to know exactly how these sailors fought to survive, what they ate, how they patched holes, how they kept their sanity, there's a detailed video for that right here in the card. Remember, the sea wasn't just a vast expanse of water. It was a prison, a battlefield, a test of human will. And those who sailed it, they were heroes in their own right, facing the merciless fury of nature, driven by hope, fear, and the impossible dream of discovery. Thanks for hanging with me through this journey. If you're into stories of human grit and maritime history, subscribe and hit that bell. There's always more beneath the waves. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a ship centuries ago. The salty air hits your face like a slap, and the wood beneath your feet creaks and groans under the weight of the storm. The horizon is a swirling mess of grey clouds and turbulent waves. You're part of a crew risking everything for discovery, wealth, or empire. But behind the scenes of this daring adventure are brutal, gritty realities, the kind that could wipe you out overnight. Today, I want to dive into some of the deadliest jobs aboard these colonial ships and how sailors fought to survive, despite the odds stacked against them. First up, let's talk about one of the most dangerous tasks, repairing the hull in the middle of a storm. The ship's bottom was a weak point. When a seam burst or a plank cracked, sailors had to get down there. Imagine the chaos, the wind howling, rain slicing through your clothes like shards of glass. The cold was the assassin, creeping into your bones. They used pitch and tar, heated over fires, to patch up leaks. The men would climb down ropes, sometimes with just a wooden bucket of hot tar, risking falls or being washed overboard. The tar was boiling, sticky, and blindingly hot, dangerous enough to burn skin or cause accidents. Yet they had no choice. Without quick fixes, the ship could sink in minutes, drowning crews in the icy depths. But it wasn't just about the hull. Next, consider the problem of dealing with a sudden outbreak of disease. Malaria, dysentery, scurvy, these were constant threats. Medical knowledge was primitive. Sailors often relied on herbal remedies like lemon or lime juice to stave off scurvy, which was a killer linked to vitamin C deficiency. Imagine the crew, weak and trembling, vomiting blood, gums bleeding, teeth falling out. Shipboard hygiene was minimal. Imagine a wooden vessel packed with hundreds, with rats scurrying and sewage pooling below decks. The smell, a mix of rotten food, sweat and salt. Hygiene practices, limited at best. Still, sailors kept a few remedies on hand, and some captains tried to keep cabins as sanitary as possible, though that was a losing battle in close quarters. And then there's the danger of fires. Wooden ships were tinderboxes. A stray spark from a blacksmith's forge or a discarded pipe could ignite the rigging or sails. Once flames caught, the ship was a living torch. To combat this, crews kept buckets of seawater ready at all times. They drilled daily, practicing fire drills. Imagine the chaos, water splashing everywhere, men scrambling with buckets trying to douse a spreading inferno. Firefighting on a ship was a cat-and-mouse game. If they failed, the ship burned to the waterline along with everyone aboard. That risk was so real that some ships stored their gunpowder far from the fire hazards, and the captain's orders were strict about smoking and sparks. But what about the worst enemy of all? Stormy seas and the chance of capsizing. Ships could be battered for days by relentless gales. The massive sails, made of heavy canvas, strained against the wind. Imagine being on deck, trying to reef the sails while the ship pitches violently, water crashing over the bow, the salt spray freezing your skin. The crew had to be swift and precise, no room for hesitation. They used tools like marlin spikes to tighten ropes, patch torn sails with canvas patches, or lash cargo down tighter than ever. Still, sometimes the ship would take a massive wave over the side, flooding the lower decks. Pumps were essential, but they were manually operated. Sailors with buckets and shovels fighting a losing battle against the rising water. The danger was constant, and often a storm would claim lives in moments, crushed by falling masts, drowned in flooded compartments, or thrown over the side. And it gets worse. Imagine a crew member, like John from a crew of 150, caught in a storm. His hands are raw from handling thick ropes. His teeth are stained from seawater, gums bleeding. Suddenly a wave hits him, knocking him into the rigging. He's hanging on for dear life, heart pounding, trying to avoid being washed into the abyss. Or think about the ship's carpenter, who might have to fix a broken mast, climbing up the shaky, rolling mast with a saw and hammer in hand, risking falls that could mean certain death. These sailors had to improvise, using whatever materials they had, scrap wood, rope, metal scraps. Their survival depended on skill, strength, and luck. Now let's add a bit more to this cocktail of danger: malnutrition and dehydration. Food on ships wasn't exactly gourmet. They carried dried beans, hardtack, salted meat, and barrel after barrel of water. But the supplies often ran out or spoiled. Imagine eating hard, stale biscuits for weeks, mold creeping into the barrels, worms wriggling in the food. Water. It was often salty or stale, making sailors thirstier. Dehydration, combined with scurvy or dysentery, weakened the crew further. Yet some sailors squeezed lemon juice from what little they had, an improvised medicine that could save lives. Still, many succumbed slowly, their bodies breaking down under the relentless pressure of hunger, disease, and exhaustion. And if that wasn't enough, consider the psychological toll. The isolation, the constant threat of death, the endless rocking of the ship. Imagine the sailors, seasick in the early days, trembling as the ship was tossed like a toy. Gums bleeding, eyes sunken, minds strained. They sang shanties to keep morale, but the fear of the unknown, what land looked like if they'd survived the night, was always lingering. Some, faced with endless hardships, lost their grip on sanity. Mental health. No help, no therapy, just a grim fight to hold on to hope. But throughout all this chaos, sailors developed clever solutions. They used wooden wedges to tighten loose planks, heated tar to seal leaks from the outside, and crafted makeshift splints from broken mast pieces for injured crew. They learned to read the weather signs, cloud formations, color of the water, to predict storms. They formed routines, rituals, even songs, to keep their minds clear amid the nightmare. It's staggering to think how much they endured. In many ways, life aboard these ships was a constant battle against nature, disease, injury, and despair. Today, ships are built with fiberglass, steel, and automated systems. We have GPS, medicine, and safety drills. But back then, every voyage was an act of human resilience, a test of guts, grit, and ingenuity. These sailors, with little more than courage and crude tools, faced dangers that could wipe them out in a heartbeat. So next time you see a modern cruise ship or cargo vessel, take a moment. Remember those brave souls who sailed in wooden prisons, fighting storms, sickness, and despair. Their sacrifices and ingenuity laid the foundation for the world we know. If you want to know exactly how they patched a leak in a storm or kept their sanity amid chaos, there's a detailed video right here in the card. Trust me, the stories of human grit and survival from that era are nothing short of heroic. The sea wasn't just water, it was a merciless enemy, a prison, a battleground. And those who sailed it, they were warriors driven by hope, fear, and the unquenchable desire to discover. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the brutal reality of colonial seafaring. If you love stories of human endurance and maritime history, subscribe and hit that bell. There's always more beneath the waves. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a ship hundreds of years ago. The salty breeze hits your face, sharp as a knife. The wooden planks beneath your feet creak and groan with every roll of the ocean. The sky darkens suddenly, clouds gathering like an angry mob ready to strike. The wind howls through the rigging, a relentless scream that echoes your rising dread. You're not just a passenger in this floating prison. You're part of a brutal, deadly world where survival depends on guts, grit, and quick thinking. Now picture the crew, men and women who signed up for this voyage, knowing full well the risks, yet facing them day after day. Their stories, harrowing. Their resilience, unbelievable. And today, we're diving into one of the most terrifying and often overlooked aspects of colonial seafaring, the most deadly professions aboard those ships and the human stories behind them. Let's start with the carpenter. Sounds boring, right? But this was a crucial role, especially in those fragile ships made of wood, sometimes up to 2,000 trees used in a single vessel. These guys worked in the heart of danger, patching leaks caused by storms, pests, or battle damage. Imagine them, crouched in the dark, soaked in salt water, wielding a chisel and hammer. The smell of damp wood mixed with tar and sweat. One wrong move and a plank could crack, sinking the ship faster than you could blink. They faced the constant threat of collapsing beams, and the pressure to keep the ship afloat was immense. Next up, the cook. Now you might think cooking is safe, but not aboard a ship in the 16th or 17th century. No refrigeration, no fresh water for long stretches. Meat rotted quickly, rats and bugs shared the galley. Imagine the sound of rats scurrying through the dark corners, the smell of spoiled food mixing with salt and mildew, waste and garbage piled up, attracting disease-carrying flies. The cook's job: to keep the crew alive with whatever could be salvaged, often through dangerous makeshift methods. And if the food ran out, starvation and scurvy lurked just around the corner. Then there's the boatswain or bosun, the master of rigging and sails. These sailors faced a different horror, the dangerous climb. Picture a crew member scaling a mast, 100 feet above turbulent waters, fighting the wind's violent tug. One slip, one broken limb, and you could fall into a whirlpool or be dashed against the hull. This wasn't just risky, it was deadly. And when storms hit, those sails became massive, dangerous sails of death. They could tear loose, flailing wildly, smashing everything in their path, mutilating crew members with splinters, or even ripping the mast apart, leaving the ship adrift and vulnerable. But not all dangers wore a visible face. The surgeon's role was one of horror and heartbreak. Imagine the smell of blood, rotting flesh, and burnt gunpowder in a tiny, dark cabin. These surgeons, sometimes just barbers with rudimentary tools, had to amputate limbs to save lives. Blood often sprayed everywhere. Screams echoed through the wooden corridors. Imagine losing a finger, then a hand, then an arm, the pain, the blood loss, the shock. And more often than not, infection would set in just as quickly. They battled not only disease and injury, but also despair. Crew members, their limbs gone, their bodies broken, often faced death with little hope. Now think about the lookouts. Standing at the highest point of the ship, eyes scanning the horizon, trying to spot land, rocks, or enemy vessels. But the sea was cruel, unpredictable. Sudden squalls, fog thick as soup, or a rogue wave could swallow a sailor whole. Imagine the mental toll. Every glance outwards was a gamble. Hope flickered like a candle in the wind. A sighting of land meant rescue, safety, a chance to breathe. But false alarms or missed signals could mean wreckage, death, or even cannibalism in the worst cases. The psychological pressure, unbearable. And what about the sailors who manned the cannons during battle? They were the frontline warriors, exposed to enemy fire, explosions, and flying shrapnel. You could be hit while just trying to reload, your hands trembling from adrenaline and fear. One cannonball could wipe out half the crew in an instant. The noise, deafening. The smell of gunpowder and blood, overpowering. These men often fought until their hands bled, risking death for a few extra yards of territory or treasure. But perhaps the most harrowing of all was the role of the grinders or firemen, especially on later ships who had to stoke the boilers. Imagine shoveling coal into a blazing furnace in the freezing cold, the heat intense enough to melt metal. The coal dust coated their lungs, the noise deafening. A single spark could cause an explosion, engulfing everyone in flames. Their bodies were battered, their faces blackened, and many suffered from burns, respiratory issues, or death by suffocation, all for the promise of keeping the ship moving. Now here's the kicker. These roles, these professions, they weren't just jobs. They became part of who these sailors were. Their bodies bore scars, their minds haunted by memories of sickness, storms, and death. Many suffered from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress, nightmares, anxiety, and numbness. But they kept going. The human spirit, driven by survival, was astonishing. But here's the real revelation. The death rates were staggering. Some ships lost up to 20% of their crew on a single voyage. That's like losing 1 in 5 friends or family members. Imagine the toll. The funerals held at sea, bodies thrown into the ocean, the grief eating away at the survivors. These sailors faced such dangers daily that death was always lurking around the next wave. And the stories, they're not just numbers. They're real raw tales of courage. Like the cabin boy who patched a leaking hull with pieces of broken mast during a storm, risking his life to save everyone else. Or the cook who, with trembling hands, sewed up a crew member bleeding from a shattered arm, fighting tears and shock. Or the lookout who refused to leave his post during a storm, even as the ship creaked and threatened to break apart, eyes fixed on the horizon, praying for land. What does all this tell us? That the men and women of those ships weren't just sailors, they were warriors of endurance. They faced a world that was cold, cruel, and unpredictable. Their bodies and minds, hardened by suffering, forged in pain and perseverance. Their stories, an unbreakable testament to human resilience. Today, we get on a cruise, press a button for food, and enjoy safety measures that these sailors could only dream of. Modern ships are built with steel, fiberglass, and sophisticated technology. We carry GPS, medicine, and safety drills. We're protected by barriers these sailors would kill to have. Sometimes I think about those brave souls, the unknown heroes who endured the worst conditions, risking everything for the hope of discovery, wealth, or simply survival. And honestly, we owe them everything. Their sacrifices, their resilience, their relentless courage laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. Without their suffering, their ingenuity, we wouldn't have the global map, the trade routes, or the stories that inspire us still. So next time you look at a ship sailing smoothly across the water, think about what it took to get there. Think about the human lives, the sacrifices, the stories of suffering and survival. That's the true legacy of colonial seafaring. And I promise, if you want to learn more about how they patched a leak in a storm or kept their sanity amid chaos, there's a detailed story right here in the card. Trust me, these tales of human grit and endurance are nothing short of heroic. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Remember, the sea wasn't just water, it was a merciless enemy, a prison, a battleground. And those who sailed it, they were warriors, driven by hope, fear, and the relentless human desire to discover. Their sacrifices echo through history, reminding us of what it truly means to be brave. If you love this story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next voyage. Because the sea's secrets, they're never fully gone, just waiting to be uncovered.